And then the realization that shelter work is not easy. It's extremely challenging if you are to cater to the services and the empowerment of women. So with this realization, even today, after 1995, it's almost like the Beijing conference, 20 years of opening a shelter, I am sure those of us who are in this room still face the challenges of generating resources, adequate resources, for the continuity of services in a shelter and for quality services. This is a very huge area where strong advocacy is required. There are certain Asian countries, I'm sure in Australia and even Taiwan to some extent, where you have government support in most of the shelters. But then there are most countries in other parts of the Asia where governments still do not support shelters, and also the concept, the philanthropic concept of the corporate houses, the business houses supporting a shelter is still not developed. So in those areas, in those countries, it is extremely difficult to find those resources to give continuity to shelters. And one of the reasons is even development partners, including UN agencies, do not support shelters for a long term. If they do it, they may do it as a one-time event for a year, 6 months, but after that, the support is not there. And most development partners we have approached have talked about indicators. How many women do you reach in a year? They want to hear thousands, hundreds of thousands, and that can be reached only through awareness and prevention programs, but not shelters, because shelters directly you cater to a certain few number of women at a certain period of time, which do not fit into their huge indicators. Moreover, development partners are ready to support research, awareness work, but not a shelter because it's a non-ending long-term project. So that is also one of the reasons development partners do not keenly support shelters. So no business houses, no government support, no development partner support. So I think those of us who are operating shelters, amidst these challenges, must be appreciated because we are reaching out directly to women. But then look at the potential of shelters in strengthening advocacy work, where I feel we have not been able to adequately link it to the bigger need of controlling violence against women. For example, Saathi now runs 3 shelters in Nepal. The survivors or the residents for the shelters are referred to by government hospitals, by the police, by other NGOs who are running legal aid services, by hospitals, by medical practitioners. But, and this is a very important part of their work. But then when it comes to the bigger advocacy, the shelter work is not incorporated in their advocacy. So shelter work is somewhat looked at as completely different. So I think that is where, in the coming years, we need to look at, because even for legislation reform, the evidence that comes are from the cases that comes into the shelters, which makes your advocacy for legislative and policy reforms much stronger. So there is a great need for people or organizations who are working for policy changes, legislative changes, to link the work with the shelter work so that we strengthen our advocacy for supporting shelters. So these are some of the challenges, and then, so when you open a shelter, like I told you, Saathi opened a shelter, we wanted to work on domestic violence, we made women aware, they came out of the houses, there was no support, so we opened shelters, and then we faced the challenge of no legislation for domestic violence. So again, to advocate, all this comes, within the gamut of running shelters, and then to advocate for a legislation that recognizes domestic violence. So after 14 years of advocating for a domestic violence legislation, Nepal finally has a domestic violence law, which was passed in 2009. And then again comes the education part, the implementation part. So the implementation part is again extremely challenging because governments have laws, but implementation at the local level is extremely challenging. My time is up. What I'm trying to say here is in the coming, during the CSW, I'm extremely proud to be a part of the global network of women's shelter, which emerged. That was like a boon for us who was running shelters. Finally, there's going to be some visibility and stronger advocacy on shelters at the global level, at the regional level, and the national level. And now we have a very active Asian network of women shelters under the leadership of Chi, which is doing great work. Even having visibility during the CSW is extremely important. So in the coming 2 weeks, I feel those who are running shelters need to link up with a bigger advocacy of what do we want to see in the post-2015 development agenda in terms of supporting and enhancing shelter work and curbing domestic violence. So this is all a work that we need to do together. I would like to thank ANWS for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Bandana. She's the chairman for the GNWS. Yeah, so it's very wonderful we have her here. So next will be